Think about the Roman Empire. They conquered pretty much everything they could see. Britain, Gaul, they marched right to the edge of the known world. But there was this one island, an island they just never touched. And you have to ask yourself why.
I mean, really, why? Why would the biggest, most organized, most relentless empire in history just stop at a narrow strip of water? What was it about that place that kept the legions at bay? To get to the bottom of it, we have to look at the island through their eyes, the land they called
Hibernia. The name itself sounds a bit chilly, doesn't it? And for the Romans, that's exactly what it was. A place of mystery, cold, untamed, and ultimately unconquered. But here's the thing. The story of this island, it doesn't start with Rome. Not even close. To really understand it, we've got to rewind the clock way, way back.
So let's journey into that world before Rome, a world that existed long before a single Roman sandal ever stepped on British soil. A place of mist, stone circles, and a totally different way of seeing the universe.
The sheer depth of time here is just staggering. We're talking about the first humans arriving in Ireland 10,000 years ago, as the ice sheets pulled back. That's thousands of years before anyone we'd call a Celt showed up, and an eternity before Rome was even a thought. The roots of this place run deep.
And you know what's so fascinating? Who these first people actually were. They didn't roll up like some massive conquering army. Nope. They were explorers, hunters, and fishermen, arriving in small boats. Modern genetics tells us they were closely linked to people all along the Atlantic coasts of Spain and France. They were part of this vast, seafaring culture that predates the Celts by millennia.
And these people, man, they built some incredible things. Just to put it into perspective for you, their greatest surviving monument, a place called Newgrange, is 500 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Just let that sink in for a second. 5 whole centuries older.
So what is Newgrange? It's not a castle or a fortress, it's basically a giant celestial clock. It's a tomb, engineered so perfectly that on the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice, a single beam of light pierces the darkness and illuminates the chamber deep inside. This wasn't some primitive culture, these were people who understood the cosmos. They lived by the rhythm of the sun, not by an emperor's calendar. All right, now let's fast forward thousands of years. A new influence begins to arrive. One that's going to define Ireland for millennia to come. We're talking about the Celtic soul.
Now, we used to have this image of a massive Celtic invasion, right? Armies sweeping across the land. But the archaeology tells a totally different story. There are no signs of widespread warfare or cities burned to the ground. Instead, it looks like Celtic culture just kind of seeped in. The language, that incredible arts, their social structure, it was all absorbed gradually, more like a fusion than a conquest.
And what a culture it was. On the one hand, you had these fierce warriors, absolute masters of metalwork, creating these beautiful, deadly swords and shields. But, and this is so important, it was also a society of poets. A powerful bard could literally destroy a king's reputation with a satirical poem. Think about that. In Celtic Ireland, the power of the word was every bit as mighty as the power of the sword.
This whole mindset shaped their politics too. Ireland wasn't one big, unified state, not like Roman Gaul. It was more like a patchwork quilt of over 100 small, independent kingdoms. Yeah, they had this symbolic idea of a high king at the sacred hill of Tara, but in reality, all power was local. It was completely decentralized.
Even their idea of a king was totally different. A king didn't just rule his territory, he was symbolically married to it, wedded to the goddess who represented the land itself. A good, just king meant the land was fertile. An unjust king brought famine and disaster. His authority came from the land, not from some distant emperor.
Okay, so with this complex, spiritual, and decentralized world thriving just across the water, we can finally get back to the Roman point of view and that big question.
And let's be clear, the Romans knew all about Ireland. The historian Tacitus wrote that the island could have been conquered and held with just a single legion. One. So it was never a question of military might. Rome absolutely could have taken it. The reason they didn't? Well, it came down to a simple calculation.
It was pure pragmatism, a cost-benefit analysis. For Rome, Hibernia had very little strategic value. They believed its natural resources were limited, and honestly, they needed every soldier they had to finish the brutal, expensive conquest of their much larger neighbor Britain. In the cold, hard math of empire, Ireland just wasn't worth the effort.
And that decision
to just leave it alone, it had massive, lasting consequences. It set Ireland on a completely different historical path from almost all of Western Europe.
Think about it. No legions. That meant its warrior culture was never broken and replaced by the rigid, top-down structure of the Roman army.
No legions also meant no famous Roman roads. You know, those incredible highways that reshaped landscapes everywhere else. The ancient Irish pathways and territories, they remained intact. And maybe, most importantly, without Roman bureaucracy, there was no widespread Latinization. The native language, the Celtic branch that would become modern Irish, was never suppressed. The culture, the laws, the stories, they all just kept developing on their own terms.
And this leads us to the final, beautiful irony of this entire story. The incredible legacy that was born directly from Ireland's isolation.
So check this out. The Western Roman Empire finally crumbles, plunging Europe into chaos for centuries. And what happens? Ireland, the island that was never Romanized, the one untouched by the fall, becomes a safe harbor for knowledge. Irish monks in remote monasteries painstakingly copy and illuminate manuscripts, preserving the classical and religious texts of the very same empire that had decided they weren't worth conquering.
So that deep, resilient core of Irish identity, its language, its mythology, its unique way of seeing the world, it was all forged in a world that existed before Rome, developed without Rome, and ultimately thrived in spite of Rome.